Alright guys, this is Stephen Hammond coming back to you with my thoughts on the Lake Tahoe Spartan World Championships race. For those that aren't clear on what the World Championship quite entails, the Lake Tahoe Spartan is, for the most part, a regular old Spartan race. It is a particularly tough venue, but they offer the Beast Distance, the Ultra Beast Distance, and the Sprint Distance race, and they also have the World Championship Heat. Just anyone can sign up for any of those races, even the elite heats. Now, the difference with the World Championship heat is that you have to qualify to enter that heat. That means the World Championship was made up of over 200 people, each of whom came in, the top 5 or 10 of some other race somewhere. So this was all of the fastest Spartan racers in the entire world all put together. Anybody who was able to race in that particular heat was extremely fast and extremely competitive. So the point is that anybody who was racing that day in the World Championship heat, major props to them. I know that Sarah Knight and Ryan Paulin in the Beasts were also racing in the championship heat. So if you happen to come across them, let them know that they're awesome for just making it to the starting line. I mean, really, anything other than DFL is a major accomplishment at this race. Alright, so it was Lake Tahoe. This race is notorious for being extremely hilly, lots of elevation gain, at a particularly high elevation to start with, and for being one of the colder races on the Spartan calendar. With that in mind, I really prepared for the cold as well as I could. I'd really like to give a shout out to our sponsors, the GH Unders. I made sure and wore the GH Unders shirt, the shorts, and the arm warmers, as well as my favorite, the shin guards. And I think it really helped out with combating the cold. So some of the other equipment that I took on the course, I had my Garmin 920 to take a look at the timings afterwards. For shoes, I wore the usual Brooks Pure Grits, and I just had some really cheap gym gloves that I was wearing. The gloves themselves ended up being more of a hindrance than a help because of the cold, but I'll get into that in a little bit. I also carried 2 energy gels onto the course. I expected there to be a little bit of nutrition on the course to grab as well. They mentioned that there would be water stations, but not a whole lot of other nutrition. So the starting elevation was 6,200 feet at the starting line. It was a pretty chilly morning, not quite as cold as I expected, so I was pretty thankful for that. But right off the bat, about, a quarter mile into the race, the first obstacle was rolling mud. And for those that don't know, rolling mud involves jumping in and out of a couple of big puddles of water. So it was just immediately, everybody was getting wet. It was cold, it was miserable, and any part of my body that wasn't covered with the GH Unders was really freezing really quick. Now, the great thing about the GH Unders is that they pulled the water away from the skin so that even though the clothes were wet, they were keeping me from being terribly wet. So it helped out a little bit. Unfortunately, my gloves did get wet and my hands remained freezing cold until, about 20 minutes later, I ended up just pulling off the gloves and keeping them off for the majority of the race. After the rolling mud, we started heading uphill towards the first peak, and it was all in the shadow of the mountain. That really exacerbated the cold. It was a really chilly morning, but like I said, other than my hands, for the most part, I was all right. Unfortunately, about 20 minutes after the rolling mud, one of the first obstacles that we hit, after a couple of really kind of throwaway obstacles like hurdles and the over, under, through walls, those are usually pretty easy, but we hit the monkey bars while we were still pretty cold. My hands were absolutely freezing. I had taken off my gloves maybe 2 minutes before, but my hands were still really cold and really clumsy, and it was the first time this entire year that I thought that I might fall on the monkey bars. Luckily, I was able to kind of muscle my way through them without falling, but there was a lot of jostling. I had a few people buzz by me and actually kick me on the monkey bars that were probably a little bit overly competitive, trying to get by a little bit too fast, but maybe that was just me being overly cautious and slow. So we hit the first peak soon after at about 7,500 feet, and then we started heading downhill. Now luckily the trails were really runnable, not too much super technical terrain, so I was able to open up and run pretty fast without stopping. Unfortunately, on that first descent, I started getting some pain in my left foot, and I thought I might have had like a fracture or a break in some of my metatarsals, so I tried to take it a little bit easy. I tried to baby my foot while not slowing down too much. It wasn't so much pain that I wanted to stop, that I felt like I needed to stop or anything, but I thought that it might have turned into something worse if I hammered it too hard. So after that first ascent, we headed towards the finish area, which was pretty cool. Able to see everybody, and everybody was able to cheer on the racers, and it was great to see everybody down at the finish area, see all the cheering crowds and everything. Then we headed up, and that was about at mile 4.5. Again, the elevation there was just over 6,000 feet. Then we started heading back up for the second ascent. At that point, I started feeling really sluggish, really fatigued, like I might have been hypoglycemic or having a hard time with the elevation or something. I'm not entirely sure. I felt that I had eaten plenty before the race, and I felt that I was keeping up on nutrition. And in previous high elevation races, the elevation hasn't been terribly hard, so I couldn't exactly tell you what was going wrong. I didn't feel like I was hitting the wall or anything, just like I was kind of lightheaded and finding it really difficult to concentrate. So I don't know, I'll have to look into that, see if there's anything I can do for future races. It might have been a nutrition issue. I'll have to see if taking more energy gels onto the race or something like that helps out. So at mile 7, we hit the spear throw, the infamous Spartan spear throw. At that point, my hands were still feeling pretty clumsy, and also my joints were all inflamed, like my fingers were poofed up. I looked like I had kind of Mickey Mouse hands going on. I think I had some water retention, so it might have been that I was a little bit dehydrated. Probably wasn't drinking enough at that point. Like I said, I was lightheaded, found it kind of hard to concentrate. I think I had some edema in my hands. And the interesting thing about the spear throw is that it seems like the more negative talk that I actually vocalize, the better I tend to do. So I usually, as usual, I just turned to the volunteers and made a couple of jokes about, oh, this is guaranteed burpees. Like, of course I'm going to fail. I know that I'm going to do terrible. And I turned around and looked a little bit high into the right of the target, since I tend to throw low and to the left. And I just hurled the spear as best as I could. And lo and behold, it stuck in the hay bale low and to the left. So I was pretty happy to avoid doing any burpees at that point. So near the peak elevation of the second peak, around 7,500 feet, we had the double sandbag carry. Now, even though I'm a really fast runner, I'm not a terribly strong guy. Anybody who's seen me knows that I'm kind of a smaller person. I have a lot of trouble with the heavier carries. So I did the best I could, but this was a double sandbag carry. Usually the double carries are saved for the elites, and the last time I had a double carry, it was really, really hard. So I don't think the terrain was terribly tough, but it was a pretty long one. It was about a quarter mile long. My strategy was to use both hands to hoist one of the bags up onto my shoulder and just carry the other bag by my side, because like I said, I'm not a terribly strong guy. I don't have the strength to pick up and throw one of those bags onto my shoulder one-handed, and I couldn't like balance the one bag on my shoulder and use both of my hands to throw the second bag onto my other shoulder. That just wasn't working out. So anyway, that took me quite a bit longer than I was hoping. That's about the time that I saw the first elite female pass me, so they were doing pretty well at that point. Now, I believe it was after the sandbag carry, they had a new obstacle that I'd never heard of called I think it was called the Cormax Flip or something odd like that. It was these oblong rubber objects that were maybe like 6 feet long. I think they were filled with water. They were incredibly heavy, and the goal was to flip them end over end, 2 times one way and then 2 times the other way. They were really heavy. I had a pretty hard time with it. Took me a little bit longer than it probably would have taken some stronger guys, something like Hunter McIntyre or our own Ryan Paulin. I know he's a pretty strong guy. I'll bet he was able to just buzz right through the Cormax Flip. But anyway, I'm glad that I've been keeping up with my deadlifts throughout the year and throughout my training. So I was able to finally, after some struggling, get through that obstacle. Next up, soon after the Cormac's flip, was the notorious swim, which is near the peak elevation. The water was incredibly cold. I would say it was around 52 or 54 degrees. It was probably some of the coldest water that I've swum in. And for those that know, I have a background in triathlon, so I do a good amount of open water swimming. So when I say it's the coldest water that I swim in, that's actually saying something. I've swam in a lot of really cold water. So the swim was a short loop with mandatory life preservers. It was different from other Spartan swims, which are generally just like straight across a pond or something like that. The benefit of having it be a loop is when I picked up a life preserver, I actually stripped off as much clothing as I could. So I was down to pretty much just my shorts and my shoes. With the GH under shin guards, I didn't want to bother taking off my shoes. I know it probably would have taken a little bit of time to put them back on. So anyway, I stripped off most of my loose clothing, took off my gloves, took off my shirt, put on a life preserver, and I was really anxious about getting in the water. Like I said, I've done a lot of triathlons. Every single triathlon starts with an open water swim, and of about 20 or so triathlons that I've completed, I've gotten 3 DNFs, and each DNF has been because the water during the swim was too cold. So I don't deal terribly well with cold water. So I let the medics know that we're standing at the shore, just like keep an eye on me, make sure I don't die or drown or anything. And I jumped in the water. I was really super anxious to get the water. I didn't really want to do it, but I finally just Spartaned up and jumped in. And oddly, once I was in the water and moving, it definitely sucked. Like it was immediate, painfully cold water. But it was familiar territory. Like I've done a lot of swimming in really cold water. So I knew that even though my hands and my joints were kind of seizing up, that I could just kind of muscle through it. And it doesn't take a whole lot of finesse to swim. So as long as you're kind of moving in the right kind of way, you're going to be going in the right general direction, and you'll get through it. And you're in and out of the water in 2 or 3 minutes. It really isn't a super long swim. The life preserver made it a little bit difficult. I don't have a whole lot of experience swimming with one, and it puts you in a weird position with your head like way up and your legs are kind of dragging underneath you. So yeah, it was doable, but I got out of the water and pretty much everything was seizing up at that point. It was clear that even after about 3 minutes, just 3 minutes in the water, I was pretty hypothermic, feeling really bad. My joints were seizing up, my muscles were seizing up, but I was hoping that if I, got out and sprinted for a couple of minutes, I would be able to warm back up. Soon after the swim came the 8-foot wall. I'm not a terribly big guy, so I always approach the 8-foot wall knowing that it's like right at the limit of my ability. I swear, if it was 8 feet and 1 inches, I don't think I'd ever be able to get over that damn wall. At that point, Sarah Knight, one of the Beast Elites, had passed me, even though, the women elites start, 10, 15 minutes after the men's elite. I saw her approach the 8-foot wall. There were 2 other elite women already using the kicker, and I saw Sarah and jumped straight over in the middle of the wall, and I thought that was pretty awesome. First try for her, so great job, Sarah. So yeah, I approached the wall with my usual technique, which is to get right up against the wall and to just do a standing leap as high as I can. I found that that's the strategy that works best for me. Because of the cold swim, my legs really weren't firing. So when I first jumped, I only got like 3 inches off the ground. It was really pitiful. I probably missed it by a good 6 inches. So after trying to warm myself back up a little bit, I sucked down my second energy gel of the race. I went back and did a couple of quick hops to remind my legs what they were supposed to freaking do. And I took a couple more jumps. I was able to get my hands up over the wall, but again, my hands were absolutely freezing and completely useless, and I wasn't able to get a good grip on the top of the wall. It was awful, it was terrible, it was horrible. It took me like 8 or 10 tries before I was actually able to get a grip on the top of the wall and pull myself over. So I think that's the hardest 8-foot wall that I've done all year. Heading back down on the second ascent at this point, along the way was the Bucket Brigade. This is another obstacle that I find particularly difficult. It's another heavy carry. The Bucket Brigade at Lake Tahoe was not particularly steep, not particularly technical, but it was really, really long. It was like a half a mile long. I think I must have stopped about 10 times to rest my back along the way. And by the time I had finished, my forearms were completely shredded. I was completely depleted. I was so tired, so done. I just wanted to see the finish line and not move another inch. During the bucket brigade, I actually did run into Ryan. He's able to handle those heavy carries a little bit better than I'm able to, but I did see him along the way. I was able to sneak by him near the end of the bucket brigade, and it was cool to see a fellow beast that close to the finish line and know that we were going to finish at around the same time. But yeah, the bucket brigade just left me horribly depleted with not a whole lot of strength left in my core or in my forearms. I knew that my grip strength was really waning and I wasn't looking forward to the finish line, which always has a lot of grip strength based obstacles stacked back to back to back. So after the bucket brigade, we were coming back towards the finish area. You could kind of see the finish festival area with all of the spectators there, and the finish line was right there, and you knew that you were maybe like a half a mile away, just a couple more obstacles. Kind of gave me a jolt of energy knowing that I was so close to the finish. It was right there. And one of the last obstacles was the Hercules hoist. Now this one's kind of hit and miss for me. I know in a lot of races, the Hercules hoist is a little bit lighter. At Lake Tahoe, it was really freaking heavy. In fact, after struggling with it for, I don't know, like 5 minutes, I just gave up. Like my forearms were completely done. I don't think I could have cracked an egg with the shape that my hands were in. So yeah, after struggling with it for several minutes, I ended up dropping it and doing burpees and failing the Hercules hoist for the first time this entire year. So that was a little bit of a hit to the ego, but I went to the side, I did my burpees, I said, okay, whatever. Now, immediately after the Hercules hoist was the dunk wall, so maybe doing the burpees and getting working up a sweat might have helped out a little bit, because I gotta say, that water at the dunk wall, again, it was freaking icy cold. Out of the water, I wasn't in the water long enough for it to affect me too much, which is probably a good thing. Along the way, I knew that the rope climb was coming up. I stopped by the side of the trail and picked up a couple handfuls of dirt to try to get some of the water off of my hands. At that point, pretty much everything that I'm wearing was completely soaked. But yeah, I got to the rope climb, took a couple of deep breaths, made sure that I wasn't rushing it or anything, and got myself up the rope. As usual, pretty easy. And the last obstacle before the finish line was the multi-rig, which was an interesting setup that I'd never seen before. They had several rings followed by a horizontal hanging bar, which are pretty typical, and then a series of vertical hanging ropes with these discs on the bottom of the ropes that you could stand on. About halfway through the rings, I knew that my forearms were completely shot. I got past the rings, got onto the horizontal bar, almost slipped on the horizontal bar, and got myself to the vertical ropes. So I grabbed onto the first vertical rope and wrapped my legs around it so I had a decent foothold. It didn't have a disc on the bottom, so I didn't have anything to stand on. I'd kind of lost my forward momentum and was unable to swing to the second rope. After a couple of attempts, my feet slipped and really surprised me, and I just hit the dirt. It wasn't conscious choice or anything like that, but it was the first time I'd fallen on the multi-rig this entire season. So 2 first failures for the entire season at Lake Tahoe. Probably not a coincidence, because I gotta say, Lake Tahoe was a freaking difficult race. So I finally crossed the finish line after 3 hours and 57 minutes. I was 152nd place out of, I think there was about 230 male finishers. I was really grateful to be a part of the World Championship heat. I gotta say a special shout out to Sarah Knight, fellow Beast Elite. She finished in 3 hours and 14 minutes. She was the 6th woman overall, so if you see her, give her a high five. She did awesome that day. Ryan Paulin, I know that he didn't finish quite as well as he was hoping to, but I gotta tell you, Ryan, like I said, you're part of a really exclusive club. So congratulations, Ryan, for joining the World Championship heat. Ryan finished in 3:46. So hey man, you came in more than 10 minutes faster than me. I don't usually like to toot my own horn, but I'm a pretty fast guy. So anybody who's able to beat me in a Spartan race, they're pretty awesome. What would I have done differently to prepare for Lake Tahoe? I'm really not sure. I mean, I did the best I could. I don't think I could have prepared for it much better, except for, I don't know, quitting my job and allowing myself to train a little bit better. I think that I might have taken a little bit more time to actually acclimate to the cold. I think the cold did affect me. Anytime I get really cold, I get really poor circulation in my hands and I get really clumsy, and I think that really affected me during the race and some of the obstacles, especially like that 8-foot wall, for example. But I've spent a lot of the year doing a lot of strength training. I've got a pretty good aerobic base. I'm a pretty good runner, but I'm not the strongest guy out there. So I think if I had focused a little bit more on strength, there were a lot of really, really heavy obstacles, and the heavy carries were really tough in this race. So having a little bit more of that brute strength probably would have helped me out.
One of the unique aspects of Lake Tahoe compared to other Spartan races is that they always unveil a bunch of new obstacles. I guess this is to add an extra element of the unexpected, especially so elites can't train specifically for obstacles. One that I already mentioned was the Cormac's Flip, kind of like a tire flip, but it was heavier, and there's that element of balance that's required because of the oblong shape of the Cormac's, whatever you call it. There was also the Ape Hanger. This is like a rope climb and monkey bars rolled into one, and it's all over this waist deep pool of water. So if you fall, it's not only burpees, but you get soaked too. Another one was called the Thigh Master. Imagine a bunch of heavy punching bags hanging right next to each other. You need to get across without touching the ground by bear hugging the first one, then clinging onto it with your thighs and grabbing onto the next one. Rinse and repeat. It ended up being a lot easier than I expected it was going to be, and it was actually a lot of fun to do, I think. The last one I remember was called the Ladder to Sparta or something like that. It was an A-frame of metal bars, and you needed to climb up under one side and climb back down the other. It was kind of like climbing up the underside of a leaning ladder.
So Lake Tahoe was one of the toughest Spartan races that I've done all year. I went out, I gave it my all. I don't think that I could have been in a whole lot better shape for the race, and it still kicked my ass. Like I said, I finished just under 4 hours. So that was a long time for me to be out on course. So a big congrats to any of the other beasts who showed up and took on that course. Even if you weren't part of the World Championship heat, just getting that finish line, wow. I mean, it was a really tough race. It really took a lot of perseverance, a lot of fitness, and a lot of grit just to get there and to get to that finish line. So big shout out to anybody who made it. I know it was an opportunity of a lifetime. So thanks guys, and those are my thoughts on the Lake Tahoe Spartan World Championships. If you want to watch the race, it will be televised on NBC Sports on Christmas Day, in fact, December 25th. I think it's 3:30 Eastern time. So if you want to check out the race, make sure you tune in and see if you can spot any of the Beast racers. Thanks, guys.